Fáilteóibh, Charlie,
mad.
Taisce Ceol Dúchas Éireann. It's a great privilege to have you here in the archive.
And it's great to be here and to be looking around at all the history of this place. But it's great as a centre for yourselves, yeah.
Yeah, no, we're very fortunate here. But Charlie, I'd love over the next hour or so to speak to you about your life in music as an outstanding fiddle player, piano player, composer, and all the various people you've been involved with over the years. But you might start by telling us a bit about your background in Leitrim and a bit about your family and early exposure to traditional music.
Okay. Well, I arrived unexpectedly. My parents had a family, they thought. They had 3 sons, and that was it. And then 6 years later, this little lad arrived. So it was a kind of an unexpected arrival, but anyhow, I got there. But it kind of meant that I was like the next generation along, because when I was 4 or 5, they were, 14 or 12. All this. So I didn't have a lot of contact with them from in the early stages. But the music was in the house. My father played occasionally and not very well, but he was interested in both songs and music. And he was also interested in maintaining the setting of the tunes. He didn't feel that we should be changing them because in his younger days, you couldn't trap that setting. There was nowhere to trap it. And he was afraid that it would be lost. So he didn't like Coleman music because it was different. And I remember we bought the 78 of Miss McLeod's, and he didn't want to listen to it because it was all different from the setting he had.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was a kid of maybe 1 year, or a year and a half or something. And I was asleep in bed, and Ben came up and lifted me and wrapped a blanket around me and brought me down to the kitchen, and the mummers were in the kitchen.
Oh, brilliant.
And one of the mummers was John Gordon, the fiddler. And they all had straw peaked cover on the head, but he wasn't able to play that way, so he had a mask on him. And he was about 13 or 14 at the time. And Ben brought me down to hear him playing. So that was my first experience.
Yeah.
And then I suppose life went on until I was 5 or 6, I suppose. And Ben was taking lessons from a dance master who also taught the fiddle. And he was playing a hornpipe. And I was sent out for turf to the turf shed, with a basket. And so I was filling the basket, and he started playing in the kitchen. Yeah. And it was thin air, it was kind of frosty, it was in November or around that time. And I heard the music coming across the yard from the house to where I was. And it kind of switched me on, the sound. And so I made a promise to myself that should I try the fiddle. So the problem was that I couldn't play the fiddle because I wasn't allowed to pick it up because I might let it fall. So I had to look at it and wait. Yeah. And then eventually, when they were all out at some stage or other, I went in and I picked up the fiddle and I put it up, and I knew where the bow was there and the fiddle here, and there was 4 strings. But other than that, I didn't know. But I started playing some Irish song on 1 string. Yeah. And I found the notes, it would be like a trombone or something. I found the notes of the tune. But I was only on 1 string because I thought you had to exhaust that string before you were allowed to travel to the next string. Yeah. Anyway, a cousin of ours who was a regular visitor saw that I was interested, and he gave me my first lesson. And that was the only lesson that I got. But I got hooked, if you like. And of course, then when Ben saw me, then he spotted and he started to take care of me and encouraged me and so on. So from 6 until I was maybe 9 or 10, I was learning tunes. Now, the problem was that I was able to learn the tune fairly quickly, and I had the notes, but I had no notion of how the phrasing should be. And so it was a big fiddle, of course, a full-size fiddle. So I had the tune in my head, but I wasn't bringing it out properly, and the timing wasn't good. But I had the tune, so here I was interested, and I had a start like that. Now then, when I was around 10, Ben went off to London, and John Gordon had gone to Glasgow, and loads of other people had gone here, there, and everywhere. This was now, the war had ended, and this was around 1949, 50, and you could travel then. Before that, you couldn't travel, or it was certainly difficult. And so the bottom fell out of the pot, and suddenly there was nobody around playing music. And of course I stopped. So what would I be doing, or who would I play, or what would happen? So I stopped from I was 10 until I was 13 or 14. And this man from South Leitrim arrived on the scene, and we had just built a vocational school, and they were going to run carpentry in it and general areas. So he came, and he had been in London teaching there, and he came, and suddenly he started gathering people into a band. And he saw that I was able to play, and he invited me into the band. So I was in with 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds playing as a kid. I was 14. And so that was the kind of the kick start again to get going. And then I started listening myself to the albums, or the 78s, and taking an interest. But I didn't have a strong interest. But there was a man who played whistle, and he played fiddle as well. He was a stonemason, and he had a lot of tunes because he had travelled around the country, and the stonemasons were whistling tunes, working together on building houses or churches or whatever, and he had a lot of tunes. But he saw that I needed attention, and so he would say to me, he'd come over to the house, my father himself would talk every other night, but he'd say to me, there's a tune now, and I don't know the turn of it. Would you have the turn of it? Yeah. And I'd say, well, I don't know. I should play it and we'll see. Yeah. And he'd play the first half, you see. And then I think it goes this way, I would say then. And so he'd get me playing the tune. Yeah. And then maybe he'd only have a bit of another tune. And so he kind of fed me that way. And he got me back up on my feet in terms of an interest in the music. And that was needed. And it's a lesson that, you know, if you're a kid and you're learning music, if the people around you haven't time for it, or if they have no value on it or whatever, the kid won't progress, you know. But if there's one or two or three or whatever, listening and questioning and asking, have you this tune or have you that tune or that, then you then put value on it and you got going with it. Yeah. Now, there was nobody else of my age playing anywhere in the area, and not for a long time had I met somebody of my age, and not in the area. When I say area, about 5 miles each direction, where you could go on a bicycle, say. But then I left school, or I turned off school when I was 10, so I didn't learn very much. And I had no qualifications, but I could play the fiddle, and that was, that was it. And then this Michael Shanley man that I talked about in the vocational school, he got me into a band, a professional band. Oh. And so suddenly I was touring Ireland and England and Scotland and playing, not every night, but playing maybe 3-4 nights a week and travelling and learning and so on. And I, of course, I was learning about life, the hard times as well as the soft times. And there was a pianist in the band, and he was just brilliant. Not with Irish music, he didn't know Irish music, but as a pianist, be classical music, but just the way he played switched me on. Because my mother, when I was 6, and she saw that I was learning, taking interest in the fiddle, straight away she said, "Oh, you have to learn the piano. The piano's much better." And I'll get you to the teacher. There's a teacher in the town or the village. And so straight away she got me enrolled. Okay. And so I went along with it, and the idea was that you were taught the pieces that you'd be examined on the following year in Bundoran. And so the teacher would play the tune, and then she'd say, "Now try and read the notes." But I had the notes in my head, so I didn't need to read the notes. Yeah. And then, so I was very bad at reading notes. And then at 13, I gave it up, because before that there was one fella that was also learning piano, but then it was only girls. And so I gave it up completely. But I couldn't play anyhow. I couldn't play without having been taught, or could maybe slowly read, but I wasn't there. But this fella turned me on, the fella in the band, the pianist. And then I started to learn the piano and how to play the piano and how to figure out what to do with the left hand, because I had no clue as to what to do with the left hand. And so I spent any time I had in the evening, I'd give an hour or maybe even more, and I had Chopin, big thick book, and I went through the Polonaise, and I would question everything. I would take a bar and look at it, and then I'd see how the movement was to the next bar and the next bar, and why did he do that? Why, all of that. So over a 2-year period, I started taking lessons again. Over a 2-year period from 17 to 19 or whatever, I absorbed and got the whole picture of music and how the composers put things together and the options that were available to them, and why then, you'd have to go way back maybe to see why this happens here. And that's why I then had an interest in writing music. And then at 20, I resigned from the band. And I said, I have to get some education. So that I did. But of course, I was still playing music. And so I emigrated to Liverpool, and I spent 9 years there educating, well, not self-education, but in that world. Yeah. And then I was able to get a job there. And then there was some chance I get a job back here, although jobs were still almost non-existent. You were either in the civil service, or you were a teacher, or you were working on the roads. and the money on the roads was not great.
Why Liverpool of all places?
Well, I had gone, in the band we used to tour in England, and I had gone to Liverpool, and Tom Canning, as we called him, that's Dr. Tommaso Canning, was in Liverpool University. And also my brother had gone to Liverpool. And I felt that there I'd have contacts and so on. And so when I got there, Tom had me into the Liverpool Kelly band, as it was. And that I was there with through the 60s.
Yeah.
And then I came back. No, I got married. I met my wife, Sheila, in Clonus at the 64 Fla, and she won the two competitions, the song, Shannon song competition and the ballad competition. And Sean Murphy, one of the members of the band, and myself, we won the duets. And the band won. Well, the band had won in the previous year in Mullingar, and then we won again. So it was a great show of what we could do.
Yeah.
So we got married then in '66, and she came. She had been in England, in Birmingham actually, teaching, and then she came back to Liverpool. And I'd started my PhD, I'd done 1 year, and we got married and set up camp and got a flat or a house, or part of a house. And then, so I got I was in nuclear physics, and so I got that within 3 years, which was tough going, but anyhow, I had to because I had no money. We got some money from the university because we were teaching a bit, but anyhow, I finished, so I had a 9-year stretch, if you like.
Was it just the progression to the PhD? You know, what was the entry
progression? I studied at home first. I did 2 years at home, and I decided to go the English way because it was easier than here, and there was much better correspondence courses and so on. So I did 2 years as part of my education, I suppose, and I did O-levels. I did 5 O-levels and 1 A-level maths. And then I did more when I went to Liverpool, and I got into the university that way.
Yeah.
And I learned German because I had to have a foreign language. Yeah. So I got in 61, I think I got entered into Liverpool. I was delighted.
Yeah. You must have had great self-motivation, determination. You know, this day and age, you know, there's a kind of qualification inflation. Nearly, there's a lot of people have talked, but it would have been much more unusual.
Yeah, at that time, it was
inaccessible for people as well.
But for me, it was very exciting, and physics, maths were great for me.
Yeah,
that was the interest areas. Nuclear physics was the in thing at the time, and it was great for me. But so then, I got a job in England, in south of London, as a mathematician, and then Aer Lingus was advertising for people to do maths. And I got a job there, and so we came back to Ireland, and Sheila got a job in the school that you went to.
Yeah.
It's called Nyasson. And so we kicked off there, and we kept going.
Yeah. And in terms of the musicians who influenced your fiddle playing in the early years, you mentioned John Gordon and Ben.
Yes.
Are there others?
There were a lot of fiddlers around, and they would have been able to play in a nice way. But they were happy enough to stay that way. And I would be listening to them and looking to see what way they were playing and so on. And so I'd be turned on, I'd switched on listening, you know. And there was quite a few fiddlers there'd be a lot of them would be old. One seemed to be old. It'd be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever. That reminds me, Francis John McGovern. That was the man the stonemason that helped me. He, somebody entered me into the Sligo. There was a what is it called? The Sligo. It was competition time in Sligo.
It's not the Fiddler Junior.
No, it was before
Sligo,
that. It was. In any event, I had a competition. A lot of it was classical, I think, but they had a competition for instruments. I know that. So that fiddle competition, and I was entered into that. I think I must have been 12. I didn't know about it, but anyhow, we got put in there. So I had to go and play. And Francis John came in the car with me and one or two others. I had no notion of what I had to do or anything. And I got there and I got up on the stage and I played a hornpipe and a reel and a jig, maybe. And then I came off stage, but before I could get off stage, the adjudicator came up to me and he said, you have to play slow air in order to get on. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, it's, a slow piece. He says, let's try it there anyhow. He says, he said, go backstage for a minute or two and just think about it.
Yeah.
I had no way of knowing what to do. So anyhow, and I played a march.
Yeah.
Called Save Ireland System.
Oh, yeah, great.
Whatever. And he came up to me, he says, I'm sorry. He says, no, I can't give you the prize because you didn't play slow air.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because we would play ballads on that, but we didn't understand there was no Irish in the area and all that. But so I was always getting back to Francis John, but where was I? I don't know where I was before that.
And musicians, Liverpool, I'm assuming, was a hotbed for an Irish population.
Liverpool was a hotbed for anything and everything in the 60s, including the Beatles, of course.
Yeah.
And loads of others that grew up in the pop scene. I played anywhere I could get a bob or two. I played. There wasn't much out of the band. You get £1, I think, for a night, and I think it went up to 30 shillings.
Is that the Liverpool Cayley band? Or yeah?
No, we played, the Irish Centre opened, and we played there once a week on the Saturday night. And we glued there because there was whatever, the band and the dancers, and we played for the dancers and they responded.
Yeah.
And so we kind of got together and we were sharpened up and so on, which is why we managed to win titles like here.
Yeah.
And we'd meet once a month to talk about things, but we were playing a couple of nights a week at least.
Yeah. And the other band that you played in prior to that, that you travelled with, what type of music was it?
It was a variety of things. The band played what the dancers needed, so we played the Gay Gardens, for example, and then we toured, of course, Scotland. But it'd be real strings and hornpipes, but there'd be about 6 or 8 different dances. So we'd be playing for them, and we'd be playing whatever we learned and put together, whatever. Yeah. So the Fitzgeralds was a band that I played with. The Asro was a band that I played with. And then the Scottish bands would come over and tour with the Asro. And I remember I stood in for a fella in the Scottish band because something happened. They couldn't go on that night. And they dressed me up in their gear. and I went out and played, and then they dressed me up in our band gear, and then I went out and then played again. But so then in Liverpool, I played Scottish country music and English country music dances, because I needed the money, and do one night a week maybe there. It was all strict, and they were reading music, and then I was playing. And so they were all Scottish and English country music.
You mentioned Chopin there, and your piano lessons and the Beatles. I'm just curious. You would have developed an amazing harmonic awareness as well as a melodic awareness. So it's perhaps unusual for traditional musicians to be so strong in both. You know, can you just talk to us a little bit of the kind of creation of your piano style? You know, where what you see as those influences are the
Yeah, well, I learned quite a fair bit of music in from the various, you know, the main kind of music that classical players would play. So I would be playing Chopin's, those number one, and Marche Militaire in A major, which I read and then practiced and went round. And then there was the Winifred Atwell was playing a ragtime, and I would learn that off the radio, or maybe get the music and read it. And I'd be, you know, the minute waltz or whatever it is. I'd be doing these things. So I had a repertoire in the classical side, just for my own satisfaction, because I was aware then of everything that was happening in the tune, in the piece. And then in the summertime, I played in a pub piano, for the 8 weeks, whatever it was, because then I was earning money to pay the fee and the college fees, And so I would be in there, and I remember the Carlton. I think it was the Carlton, and there was another band that was formed in Dublin here, and the pianist in there's a great Northern Hotel was up on the hill in Bundoran. It's a very picturesque place, and he was playing there because they had a dance hall inside, small dance hall. And he came to me and said, I've just joined this band, and they'll be on tour all the time. Would you take over from me? So I played a bit there for a few weeks or a month, whatever. So anywhere there was music and a few bob, I was kind of into it.
And to apply that to the reels and jigs, so that's, you know, it's quite an achievement.
I did actually sit down then. I suppose I'd be 20 maybe, say 18, 19. And I said to myself, I'm not going to play Irish music on the piano. I'm not going to be playing reeds and jigs, because I can play them on the fiddle, and I can't do the things that I can do on the fiddle and the piano. But I can maybe support the fiddler or the flute player or whatever. And so I sat down and just said, I had listened, of course, to, I mean, there was famous recordings with good pianists. There was the brother and sister John Sligo, the Sligo pier, in 1933. Remember they recorded here in Dublin. John, famous fiddler. There was a girl there played piano. She was very, very good. Yeah, that's her. Yeah. So I sat down and I said, "What can I do? I won't be in the way, but I will be supporting." So that was the quest, if you like, to come up with different things. So when, for example, Joe Burke came to me looking to vacuum and so on, I kind of worked out, well, I had no problem with the left hand. I would know exactly what to do, but what do I do with the right hand? So then that would start me trying to look at maybe tenths and look at counterpoint and look at possibilities and so on. So I kind of worked out a system that was given a different overall sound to the production and was different from anything that had come before. So I kind of had my own style then, and then people start to copy my old style, and then now when I hear, I don't know, is that me that's playing or is who's playing? But so I kind of started something there to allow young people, because the pianists were atrocious, like, you know.
Yeah.
I'm saying that in a soft voice. But, and there's another aspect as well to it, in that every player, flute player or fiddler or whatever it is, they have their own style, and sometimes you're asked to, or they'll ask you to accompany them, but you have to actually listen to them and see what kind of style, what kind of rhythm have they, how do they play, and what kind of rhythm is it, and how are you going to help? Are you going to help them, or are you going to just muddle it up and make them, so you're in the way? So always I have to listen and that, and then there's people, and somebody says you need piano behind that, and get Charlie then, and they don't want that. They don't even hear you. Well, they're okay if they don't hear you, but that means there's no blend there. And oftentimes you're just ruining. You're certainly not helping. And let them be, because that's their style, and there is a beautiful way of playing music without any other backing or whatever. So you have to be aware of that. But then the ones that do like it and do hear it, I'm sure Michael Coleman and Morrison, they just did their thing. They didn't even hear what's going on in a lot of cases. So they weren't able to say, leave me alone or whatever. I don't know, I'm only guessing. But certainly the ones then that are interested in getting and can hear what you're doing, then you can pull them up a bit and you add to them a bit. And the likes of Joe Burke, for example, most of the professional musicians are like that. And they just like the bit of a cushion there. And just don't get in the way. And don't, if it's not amplifier or that, but don't be too loud, or be aware all of the time that your role is to support them. And you're not going to disturb them in any way, their own style, so on. So you have to learn how to handle a style, and there's some styles, and you're just in the way, really.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that, because with a backing, it's you're not doing a duet. You're letting them there, and you're just beneath them. And if you do that, and then if you know the tune is, of course, the other thing that you have to work out what chords to do. And now there's a process by which there's a set of chords that everybody has, and it applies to nearly every tune. That doesn't work either. And the style now is, you don't play the major, you just play minors all the time, relative minors. And then you'll put in a few off chords. And that's fine in jazz, and we're well used to it in jazz, but I can't see a role for it in the normal Irish traditional music, because it wasn't built on to take that, Okay, you can do it, and then that's a different product. It's not the product that we're used to. It's a different product, and it'll probably survive for a few years and die away then, and then something, it'll replace it. And the same with jazz. You can pick up an Irish tune and make it into a jazz tune. And sure, that's great as well, but it's not the same thing. So you have to be aware of all these things, if you want to be a pianist in trad music.
Yeah, and so your harmonic awareness and developed through the on the piano, and your fiddle playing rooted in Leitrim and North Connacht's style, would you say? And then your compositions. Then can you speak to us about what you see as the influences within your compositions, and to what extent, I suppose I'm curious, given your prolific output and the amount of tunes that have are deeply embedded in the tradition and in sessions all around the wherever Irish music is played in the world, your compositions are people are voting with their feet, for want of a better expression. So what extent is your harmonic awareness linked to your compositions and your fiddle playing, and you're linked as well there? Where are the balances there?
Yeah, well, when I'm creating, generally I'm creating on a subject of some sort or other that's in my head. And I'm seeking something that's going to represent that, whatever it is. Or else I'm just sitting there and waiting to see what happens. It has nothing to do with anything. It just is. And if I don't ask it to come, I'm much better off than if I'm trying to force it to come. So I might have something in my mind, and I could write something straight away, but it's not. There's nothing in it for me, and it's funny when you're reaching like that. The mind will deliver something completely different, but lovely. And so suddenly you have a melody, no attachment to anything. The melody, you might get it all or you might get part of it, changes. Sometimes you get the whole thing, and you then become frightened because you lose it if you don't get it somewhere down, because it won't last long. But you're happy with it, and you don't know. You're not worried. You haven't ever thought of what to do with it. It's just a piece of music, and it comes together nicely, and it has a rhythm, but it could be anything. It could be a classical piece. It could be an Irish song, or it could be a reel or a jig or whatever. It just comes, and you don't ask it to come or tell it to come. You wait. You just have patience and you wait. And so you get your music that way, mostly. Now, you may have to connect it up, or you may not have all of it, or you may have it, but you've forgotten the second part, say, and you can't get it right then. If you don't get it straight that time, there's a note here and a note there, and they're jarring, and you don't know what the original was. And the original was beauty, and it was fine and lovely, but you don't have it. And you may lose it, or it's better to leave it there. And then maybe in the middle of the night, you'll jump up and say, but it was so simple. So when I'm on doing some major work, I'm looking at what am I trying to represent. And at the moment I'm working on new stuff, which I got money from the Arts Council to explore in my own way of research. So I chose to look at what did people do when they were trying, depending on the instrument that they were trying to use pentatonic notes. and is it possible to do it now? And I'm also looking at the modes, and I'm looking at how pentatonic and a mode actually mold together very nicely. So I'm writing at the minute stuff, and so it's a new ground for me to be working in. I'm turning over different sods, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm coming up with stuff which I'm linking to a piece of history back in the end of the 1500s.
Okay.
And that's completely tangential to anything that I've been doing before.
Yeah.
So that's keeping me
Yeah.
entertained.
Yeah. And do you physically compose? Do you sit yourself at a piano or with a fiddle, or is it in your mind? I know sometimes a tune will come to you outside of any.
It's anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
It's anyway.
So,
yeah. But in this case, you just have to watch that you don't break the 5-note rule, which you do get into eventually, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
But it's working for me
Yeah.
at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's the answer to some question that I've forgotten. No,
Yeah. No. And in terms of your recordings over the year, could you talk us through your
Yeah. Well, the first recordings were in 1957, I think, with Kieran Mahuna, and he was in Bundoran in the summer recording, and I was with the Fitzgerald Band, which is based in Bundoran, and so we played tunes, and at that time in the band, to kind of keep people on their toes and that, we'd stop being a band and be solos would come in and keep the rhythm going and play his or her version of the tune. So I remember we did a set of three tunes, and the second one was the Skylark, and I had been doing the Skylark as a solo piece. So we did it just naturally as part of Kieran's thing. So then he played it quite a lot after that for a while. So that would have been my first 1957, yeah. And then 59, the SRO recorded an album with Waltons. And they had songs, they had a singer, and then we played music. And I played the bass on that particular recording.
an upright
bass,
yeah.
And because the Fitzgeralds bought a bass, and it was standing in the kitchen in their house, and every time I went in, I would be trying out bass, and I had the notes on the bass and so on. But anyhow, so that was 59. I think then the Liverpool Kelly Band recordings would be the next. We did 2 albums, and we did a lot of radio work, which wasn't saved as well. But so that would have been there
in the UK or in.
No, we used to come over to Ireland for the different competitions and all like that. So RT would get us to do Cayley House or get us to do something here. But that's been lost.
Yeah, we might have a route around here. We've a big tranche of RT's recordings recently. Yeah.
Okay, and so I'd be in the 60s. That'd be 62, 3 or 4. We did the 2 albums then. I think 64 and 65 or 66. I don't know. So with a Decca, branch of Decca recordings, and then we came back in 69, and Kieran recorded Sheila because he knew her well. And Sheila was very popular in the 60s. And she was very friendly with the Clancy brothers and Tommy Makem. And she was in Belfast teaching there, and she did a lot of TV work with doesn't know the BBC or was ITV, I'm not sure, UTV, whatever. But so she recorded and I recorded. And then maybe 71, I recorded with this fiddle with Paddy Mac's mother. This is Paddy I was playing with piano last night. And Molly Higgins on the piano. And then Joe Burke came back and we started recording and I was on piano there. And I was on piano for a whole load of different things during the 70s. And then Mick and myself then, he organised and we did the album with Coulth's. And then I did a lot of work with Frankie Gavin around that time. And then in the 80s, I did an awful lot of work in the 80s and the 90s with in RTE. And then I did my own recording with Gwilene around 84, which was Lucky in Love. And you're on that, aren't you? Yeah, and Seamus McMahon. Those two flutes, three flutes.
And Ben.
Oh, but yeah. And Sheila was on singing. And then I was doing a lot of work with writing music, and I can't really remember. I was busy.
Yeah.
I mean, every Saturday I'd be, because I was working during the week, the regular job.
Yeah.
So I'd be working at night, and then I'd be out in the garden on Saturdays, and then I'd get a call from RTE, and would you ever come in and play the piano? And they'd be, if you refused, then they'd be upset. But so there's a load of recordings, so I'd say in all could be up to 50 albums of one kind or another.
And you've some major composition projects as well.
I started that with the first one was that was part of the album that I did in with Frankie, and it was stuff I wrote. It was done with Gwilene around 84, 85. Oh, Liam Moog was on it as well, whatever the name of that one is. I know the second one was the Island Wedding. So up until then, I had kind of kept to the trad, and then around 88 and 89, I'm saying to myself, sure, I could, maybe I could write for a quartet or something like that. So I started writing, and then it kind of broadened. And I found I asked one of the conductors here in RTE, Ailish knew that she was doing classical, the College of Music, and she was working with the orchestra, the junior orchestra, the national junior orchestra. But she said, go and ask this fella, he's from Wexford, I think, great conductor, great lad. So he said, you have a good arranger right in Holt beside you.
Yeah.
This is Tommy Quigley. I never knew him or that, so I knocked on Tommy Quigley's door and told him what I wanted to do. And I chatted with O'Sullivan. We were at a wedding somewhere, and I said to him, I want to write for orchestra, but with trad, with a combination of classical and trad, sometimes together and sometimes separate. He said, well, there's an awful lot of work writing for orchestra. He says, it'll break you. But anyhow, I went to Tommy and we tried out a few things. And then we brought it into RT, and Princess got a hold of it, Princess Within, and they tried it out with the orchestra in RTE. And then that was it for a while. But then sometime later, maybe a year later, I got a call from RTE the head of the music was a fella from Derry, and he said, "We'd like to record some of your stuff. Would you be interested?" So
Yeah.
we were down in Kelly's Hotel in Wexford, Sheila and myself, when the call came.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh yeah, no, I'd be happy to follow up."
Yeah.
So that was then I had a certain number, I think 5 or 6 pieces written as part of the album wedding, and that's where it started there.
Yeah.
So it kind of went on from there, and then I began to start doing arrangements myself then,
Yeah.
and trying out things and so on.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of work in it.
You got through the work, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
What advice would you have, Charlie, for? I know you've spoken about advice for piano accompanists, but what advice would you have for young fiddle players, or maybe not so young fiddle players?
I'd say the phrasing is probably the first thing to get in your head. You're better to learn with a lilt. Learn the tune first, and if you lilt it, you can do a lot without having to struggle through mechanical bows and various things. And you'll get quite easily. You'll get a phrasing there, and I know people play the tilt whistle, and that's good as well. And that could be, your grounding just as well on trad music. But we used to lilt, and Ben had lilt a tune for me, and so we were able to lilt it and phrase it at the same time, So that would be my first approach, and then whatever instrument you were using. And if you did have a basic on the whistle, say, and then you transfer that on to whatever other instrument you chose to work on, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a traditional instrument. You could pick up another instrument and start exploring what can you do with it. But I would say that, and play it slowly. Play it when you pick it up. Don't be in any rush with it. Get the bowing or the phrasing or the breathing or whatever that sounds right, because I didn't do that, and I suffered for a long time with phrasing on the fiddle. And I was rock steady on the piano. I had rhythm, my own rhythm, which my mother came from my mother. My father didn't have that, and I could lock everything in the way to phrase it. But I had got into the habit of, from a kid, as learning the notes but not learning the phrasing. And I'm still learning that.
Yeah, that's sage advice there. And just advice for aspiring composers as well, in the traditional idiom and also maybe the traditional classical crossover as well.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of people writing now, and you have to encourage people to expand and so on, but there's a lot of stuff, and it has very little relationship with trad music. There are notes, but there is no soul in it. And it's not fair on them expecting that, because anybody can write and make up a tune without even thinking or that, but what's in it? There's nothing in it, and there's certainly nothing new in it. And you'll be inclined to pick it up and you'll jazz it here or there, or you'll twist it, or you'll do it so it's different. But it's not anything related to going back 100 years or 200 years or whatever. So it's very hard to be encouraging people and expecting people to write. It's a slow process, and great if there are tunes in your head that have arrived there unannounced and you want to play them, great. But most people just say, oh, well, what will we do next? Oh, we'll make up a tune. But there's no thought about
well, what's involved in that? And unless you go back to understand, how people played and put together tunes, beautiful tunes, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. You're removing yourself from the tradition, really. I mean, the amount of the collision in New York in the first half of the 1900s was such that they were all competing with one another, but coming up with beautiful music and arrangements and so on. So it's tricky. It's very hard. Now, if you have dancers that are going to dance and you need to play something, maybe yes, but it's hard going, and unless you know where the boundaries are and what's that, where does that music belong to, or where do these notes belong to, or where's the home of these things. And unless the home is in here, I'm afraid you're up against this, really. Now, you can do it, and there are some people who can do it and do it very well, but it's really it's not learned. It's just there naturally in a person, and you don't have to know anything about music and where the notes are. You don't need that if your head is full of traditional music. I remember we'd be coming back from the Fleadh and we'd get to the airport and there'd be machines running here, there and everywhere, and every machine was playing a tune or other. You swear.
Yeah.
And there'd be another machine somewhere down there, and they were doing lovely stuff, but you couldn't quite get on.
Yeah.
You'd be in a maze, because there'd be it was full of tunes.
Cacophony of sounds. Yeah. And just the last thing, advice then for people trying to move into that ground of traditional music with classical music and arrangements for orchestras and.
Well, then don't play the same instrument.
Yeah.
I deliberately decided that if I want to play trad music, I'll play it on the fiddle. It's like two languages, really. On the piano, I'm speaking one language. On the fiddle, I'm speaking a completely different language, and there will be, a complementarity there, but you have to separate the two things. If you want to play jazz or whatever it is, grand, pick an instrument that you're not using currently for some other type of music. It's the only way to keep it separated from them. Or keep it relatively, rocked in the mood. So don't play. I know, of course, you can play classical music on the fiddle, or a classical musician. That's a very big bridge to cross. Brilliant classical musician learns and has classical music, and he's asked to learn to play Irish music. Traditional Irish music. He can't until he actually learns it in his head and it's not related to the instrumentation. And when he feels he has an understanding of it, because it's nearly impossible for them to get the nya, as they call it. And the loads of little things that we do without even thinking about it, and they never heard of them, and he can't even hear them. Never mind, learn them, So it's like a different language.
You spoke about the raw sound as well earlier.
That's right.
Reference to West Kerry set from the concert, the National Concert last night, the Bagley family.
They're so strong, that's so strong. And it's your job here to try and capture that and hold on to it. And particularly with influences coming back from far back, and we can't reach that way, but we can. It's just like the Shannon singing, it survived the beautiful melodies that are in the songs. And have survived right through all of the awful times we've had for at least 500 years of, torture because the lifestyle and the punishment we got from our neighbours was unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Anything else that finish up on?
Well, is there anything you'd like to add from your...
Well,
What's your hopes for traditional music into the future?
I'd like people to teach the kids in the style of trad music, and then if they want to go off and learn some other music, subsequently fine, but that they were exposed to that and can learn simple tunes, but if they're learning the traditional, and it's not. I don't believe in putting the ABCs up on the page. I think they have to just absorb it and know how to both absorb it and remember it. Because our ability to remember is depleted and is going in the wrong direction. And soon we won't be able to add and subtract or even handle money because it's just all just buttons.
Yeah.
So the ability of the older people to remember, and we were taught to remember in detail, what did the priest say when he did the sermon, and where did he go wrong, or why did he, the English would be examined as to whether it was well chosen or not. So everything like that was trapped and remembered. It's like playing cards in the 25. Oh, well, no, in the fifth game you played a queen there, and you shouldn't have done that. You crossed the rules.
Yeah.
So the whole playing of the cards through the night would be analysed afterwards.
Yeah.
As to who did what. And you spoiled it there. You see, you had a great chance now because you had a 5 there, and you could have trapped your man there and stopped him from winning that game.
Yeah. So the memory,
So memory was great, and we were taught to remember.
Yeah. Well, that's been fascinating, Charlie. Learned a lot of thought-provoking elements you touched on, and great advice. So, thanks so much for being a...
and one note, going back to my study days and so on. When I was studying, I went on a summer down south to where they had started to work on fusion, and now there a few weeks ago, they broke through in America with actually getting more out than was going in. But I was in at the start of that, and there was a fella in MIT in Boston, and every time I went to Boston, we'd go and have dinner, and I'd ask him. He was head of MIT of nuclear physics, in particular. They were working on fusion, and I was so delighted when I got this music that it was a breakthrough. Now, that's 60 years of hard work.
Yeah.
But just the fact that I was in on the very early days of it, it's fascinating for me.
Yeah.
So that's a completely different world. But I mean, it's just that lately I was overjoyed, and I couldn't tell anybody.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to have these passions, and that you're still inspired and completely committed to all your natural interests and expertise. But on behalf of everyone who's listened to you play and enjoying all your music, both listen to you on the fiddle and piano, but also playing your compositions, just like to thank you and Gomriel Margaret for coming to us today and giving so openly and honestly with your time and thoughts. Gomriel Margaret.
Míle buchas agus is ionach an méid obair atá siúil an seo, so leanna is a ray.
Agus cínta.
Agus,
Míle buchas.
Okay. Agus tréin